So here's our conundrum. We've been coming to you for the past couple of weeks, every Wednesday with our retro drive reviews. Today we had another classic car, but there's two problems with this one. Number one, it's a 2020 model year car, and number two, the only way to describe it is a race car with lights, meaning there is a hell of a lot of tech going on underneath this thing. So we really couldn't do it justice with just a retro drive review. So we're going to save that for our next episode, the retro drive review on the 2020 Ford GT. Today, you and I are going to do a tech review on the 2020 Ford GT, otherwise known as a spaceship. The engine, like the rest of the cars, had a very unique gestation period in that it does share architecture with the engine that's in an F-150. It's a 3.5 V6 EcoBoost, that's Ford speak for twin turbocharging. But from there, it takes a very different road. This is closer to an AMG engine in that this engine's been built by Roush Yates Racing. They in turn send the engine to Multimatic to go into the car. Now, for 2020, there is some changes to it. The cylinder linings, the pistons, they change. And then the biggest change is the intercoolers. They're bigger and they come from the Mark II race car. Now, while we're on the topic of the Mark II race car, the engine there is very similar. It's 3.5 twin turbo V6, but the transmission changes. This is a dual clutch 7-speed, where the race car is a single clutch 7-speed. Now, somewhat related to the engine, there's a theme throughout this entire car in that most components have dual functionality, two jobs. And here, that's the dry sump lubrication system. Nothing new. We've seen this in many other cars. As a matter of fact, we drove a 1955 300 SL Mercedes that had a dry sump lubrication system. So it's been around for a long time. What's unique here is the dry sump lubrication tank is a structural piece, so much so that the alternator and the air conditioning compressor are attached to it, not anything else on the car. And then there's the testing of the engine. That's had a unique story in that Ford tested this engine before the car even came out. They did it with Chip Ganassi Racing, where they used this engine in a prototype car with Riley Ford that won the 2015 Rolex 24 at Daytona. It's not often you and I see cars that take design inspiration from centuries-old churches in Europe, but here we go. And this is not one of these situations that's form that follows function. It's form that has multiple functions. The first obvious one is downforce. The second is the form, it does look pretty cool. And the third is there's a lot of function going on underneath all of this. So we've discussed V6 twin turbo. The turbochargers do not sit in the V, they sit outside the engine and they're low in the car. So the turbochargers are directly connected to the intercoolers. No, those are not the radiators, those are the intercoolers. And basically they connect down here. The air goes through the intercooler, and for the avoidance of doubt, it's hot air coming from the turbocharger, cool air coming out of the intercooler, and then there's charge tubes that go through inside the flying buttress, go behind the driver and passenger seats, you can kind of see them there, and go into the intake plenum. Then there's a couple of other cooling things going on here. On the driver's side of the car, there's some vents there, and underneath those is the clutch and gearbox cooler. And then kind of following the theme of there's multiple functions to each item, even the taillights, they're like open in the center. So yes, they're taillights, but the air that's not used here sort of escapes through the taillight. Very cool. And then this is a 2020 car, so the intercoolers, they've been changed. And for the avoidance of doubt, the airbox on these cars are behind the doors and low here on each side of the car. But the 2017 through 2019 cars, the intercooler, the air would come from the bottom here and go straight up through the charge tube. In the 2020 car, it comes in at the bottom and then goes side to side in the 2020 car, and that's how it gets a little bit more horsepower and then goes through the charge tube into the intake plenum. The good news is there's a frunk. The bad news is you ain't putting anything in said frunk because it's the residence of a rather complex hydraulic system that has four main jobs. The first, which is rather unusual because most cars we drive nowadays have an E-Pass, this works on the power steering. The second is the ride height, and fascinating how quickly it can adjust the ride height. I will demonstrate that later. And then the front under tray, that hydraulic system controls it. And then last but not least is the rear wing. That is also controlled by the hydraulic system. Okay, so let's put the wing down. I gotta go into the menu here, go into auto, and that still doesn't put the wing down. You gotta start the car moving, and then the wing will go down, and it goes down super quickly. More aggressive going to this turn with less active aero, and you do notice a little bit of difference in the front. It's almost got that 911 feel up front. Almost. Not that, but close, because there's a little like flutter in the weight of the front of the car. And there's even a bit of help whether you ask for it or not. In auto mode, that wing goes up and down when it feels it needs it. The running gag with these is that they're race cars with lights. And the absolute best example of that is the suspension. At all four corners, there are unequal length control arms. In the front, there's an anti-roll bar. In the rear, there's an anti-roll bar. But beyond that, that's when we move into the area of F1 or IndyCar technology, and there is a very good reason for that, because the people who manufacture the car, Multimatic, they manufacture and race cars. So they've pilfered some of their own technology and applied it here. And what's going on is a torsion beam suspension. Now, you and I are very familiar with Porsches or AMGs that also have unequal length control arms, but where they have like a very big coil or a dynamic ride control, like almost a strut system. This has a push rod that's connected to a torsion beam. That is in turn connected to a dynamic suspension spool valve. I didn't make up that name. It's a patented name from Multimatic, who invented it. And that's really the adjustable suspension between like normal and sport. And that also shows up in other cars, like the Aston Martin 177, AMG GT, as well as the Colorado ZR2 pickup. But then all of that is connected to torsion beam on the other side to a coil. And this is kind of the magic of the whole thing. The coil itself in like normal mode, let's say it's like this big, but notice not to scale. That allows for more movement of the suspension. So like in a normal mode, driving it down the road. But let's say you want to go into track mode. What happens is the car lowers 2 inches. That's the dynamic suspension spool valve. And then to lower the amount of movement of the actual suspension, that coil at the back, it's compressed. So it makes it a stiffer suspension. It's kind of otherworldly the way they engineered this thing. And there's a couple of like side benefits, almost a party trick, if you will, where when you lower the car with the suspension about 2 inches, it lowers super fast. Remember, it's all hydraulic. Something I find absolutely fascinating about this is the front axle lift system. Not that that's unique. Many cars like this have it. We've played with it in 911s, but the 911s are incredibly slow. This, it's instantaneous. Here, watch this. It literally goes up like that. And granted, that's a huge function of the architecture of the system and those special dampers that Multimatic puts in these things. But again, watch this. Instantaneous. So you can almost hit this thing at a normal speed, hit the button, and you're not going to hit the bottom of your car or have to pay for a lot of repair to carbon fiber. Remember back to this episode when we discussed the W194 version of this, the very winning race car that didn't have the fuel-injected engine? Well, one of the reasons why that was a winning race car was by the aerodynamic frontal area of the vehicle. They put the driver and the passenger closer together, making this less of a frontal area to go against the wind, making the car more efficient. Well, that was a trick from 1955. That trick is alive and well today in 2020. So here's how that same principle is adapted to this application. The passenger and driver, again, closer together, lower the frontal area of the greenhouse as compared to the lower frontal area of the car. But that's not the only trick going on here. It's also the height. Any car guy worth their salt completely remembers the whole GT40 and the height of the original car, even to the point of having to put a little bump in there to get Dan Gurney into the car. Well, the height of this is so low It is lower than, say, a modern-day Ferrari or a modern-day McLaren, both targets for this car. But it's also the width, in that if you were to look at a modern-day Ferrari, it would come to about here, a McLaren to about here. And then the most startling fun fact about this, you look at a Mustang, another Ford, and if you look at where the mirrors are, the height of the mirrors are of any Mustang, that is here. The only way to describe the structure in this application is artwork. It's similar to what we've seen in McLarens and Lotus, but this, it goes a couple of steps beyond that, a lot of steps beyond that. So think about the basic carbon tub. You really don't form one whole piece. Think about the machine that would have to do that. This is individual pieces that are bonded together. Best way to describe it, it's like Lego bricks of carbon fiber that are put together to create the larger tub that is the overall structure of the vehicle. Think from here to right behind the passenger compartment. And then part of those Lego bricks, there are 4 aluminum hard points. So think if I were to show you the car naked, there'd be 1 here, 1 there, and then 2 in the back. And everything else about the car, the subframes front and rear, all attached to that. And then there's another piece that's really fascinating here in that there is a roll cage fitted from the factory, and the roll cage goes right into those aluminum hard points. Another fun fact about the roll cage, there is a Mark II race car version of this. It is the same here as in the Mark II race car. The only difference in the Mark II race car, there's more crossbars in the roof behind the passenger cell as well as in the doors. Now this is the point where we go back to the Lego brick theme. Again, if I were to show you the car naked, you'd see a subframe up here that holds the front suspension, and then there's a subframe in the back, that's chrome moly. And then another fascinating thing about the structure, it's not just the carbon fiber tub that is structural. There are pieces that do double duties, like the trunk. It's worthless. It basically holds a laptop and an iPad, and that is it. But it too is a carbon fiber tub and is a structural piece. Even the mounting point for the wing in the back, that too is a structural piece. It's, as I said, artwork in manufacturing. Let's discuss materials used in construction, and here you will not at all be surprised to learn that everything is made of carbon fiber. And when I say everything, I don't mean just the carbon fiber tub or some trim on the doors. Every body panel is carbon fiber. Every structural panel is carbon fiber. There is even an option to have the wheels made of carbon fiber. And before you ask, the brakes, the rotors themselves, carbon ceramic rotors. Now that presents a bit of a practical nightmare, because while you wouldn't really be using this as a daily driver, you are going to drive it around where you live, and it's not like a normal painted car where if you get rock chips or a scratch, you don't just touch it up. Or let's say if I scuff the door sill here, that is carbon fiber. You don't touch that up either. So what I found, most people that buy these things, and you've met some of them on the show, some of our Inside the MotoMan Studio guests own these cars. Everyone that I know that owns these things, they wrap them. And they don't just wrap like the mirror fairing or the front of the car, they wrap all the body panels. This car has been wrapped by Go Shield here in Los Angeles, and they went to such an extent where they wrapped even the bottom of the car. The balance between aero and the basic operation of a normal car is fascinating. Here is a great example, the mirrors. So you've got a very wide car. The hips of the car are significantly wider than the passenger compartment, as we discussed with the frontal area. So you have to get the mirrors farther out. So check, they've done that here. But then there's the whole visibility. It's not exactly the best car to see out. You're going to have some blind spots. But what they've done to improve that is the mirrors are placed differently depending on the side of the car. So the driver's side, the mirror is farther up on the door, where on the passenger side, it sits farther back to improve, at least make the rearward visibility somewhat better. So I got to turn around here and just listen to it. Listen to the acoustics of it. The engine just is mean, and I'm in normal mode, but more importantly, listen to the noise from the front. That's all the hydraulic system, all the stuff with the dampers, all the things that make it do what it do. And it's just reminding you that, hey man, I have a lot going on underneath here and you need to show me some respect. But for me, it ties into my pilot side, because when a machine talks to you, it tells you, hey, this noise, it might sound weird to most people, but to me, that's saying, oh, the car is normal. If it wasn't making that noise, it'd be like, there's probably something wrong. It's like a language you have to learn when you buy one of these things. It's translation from English to, I guess, Canadian. The interior continues the theme of most components having dual functions. Ultimately, you are sitting in a carbon fiber tub. That is the structure of the vehicle. That is also the seats, which dictates that the seats really don't move. They're fixed seats. And it's not that the seats are part of the carbon fiber tub. They are just fixed to the carbon fiber tub. There is one small adjustment, however. You can adjust the seat back, forward or backward, so I can put myself a little bit closer to the steering wheel. That said, the real adjustments are in the steering wheel itself. One can adjust the height and the reach as well. There's still one more adjustment, and that is the pedals. There is a strap here, and you can move the pedals either closer to you or farther away from you. Storage, not one of the high points here. There is basically a trunk in the back that's like this, and then there is a very small storage bin in here. Now to another piece that is dual function, the dashboard. There are typical knobs. Thank you very much for that. All of the controls are on the steering wheel, but the dashboard doubles in that it is structural to the vehicle. So that is carbon fiber. The whole tub is carbon fiber, but this whole piece is a structural point of the car, and not just the dash itself, but the vent system that is inside the dash going into the doors. An interesting thing about driving this in traffic is there is no turn signal. If you want to turn, the turn signal is on the steering wheel. You hit the button, it automatically cancels after you make the turn, much like any normal turn signal. And let's try a different scenario, and that is changing lanes. To do that, it's very similar. You just hit the button, go over to the other lane, and it'll automatically cancel. Or depending on how long it takes you to make that lane change, you either hit it again and it turns off, or hit it again, it stays on, and then you hit it again, it turns off. Two important points. Number one, this is not going to turn into a first drive review. Instead, it's going to turn into a retro drive review. Even though it is a brand new 2020 model year car, it is also a bona fide classic. And point number two, at the end of these tech reviews, I never really get into the habit of giving away the headline of whatever our drive reviews are. But here, there is an important piece of information. You see, when Ford, Larry Holt, and his band of merry racing men at Multimatic set out to create this, they used the Ferrari 488 as the benchmark, but then quickly decided that is not high enough, so they chose the McLaren 675 LT. And I have driven both of those cars, but now I have driven this car. And you could say they exceeded the benchmark, but in reality, what Larry and the fine folks at Multimatic did here is they brought a gun to a knife fight. Until I see you in the Retro Drive review, bis später.